Bitter wind howled through the pine forests of Montana, carrying needles of snow that whipped across the deserted mountain road outside Timber Ridge. The world was a swirling, blinding white, a wilderness so cold and empty it felt like the very edge of existence. And there, right in the middle of the road, stood a tiny figure, no more than 3 months old, a German shepherd puppy, his fur fluffed up against the cold, ears flattened, eyes wild and desperate as headlights cut through the blizzard. Scout, though he had no name yet, was a blur of frantic energy, yapping and barking as the vehicle slowed, his tiny body shaking so violently it looked as if he might collapse at any moment. The snow was deeper than he was tall, but he refused to budge, pawing at the icy surface, lungs heaving with each terrified cry. He wasn't running away from the danger that lurked behind him in the woods. He was running toward something, toward hope, toward help. Inside the battered pickup, Dean Callahan tightened his grip on the wheel, staring into the storm with tired, haunted eyes. He'd been driving for hours, trying to outrun his own ghosts. The memory of a partner lost, a life derailed, a badge surrendered. But even exhaustion and grief couldn't make him ignore the wild, insistent barks that rang out above the wind. The puppy's eyes caught the beam of his headlights, terrified, yes, but also determined, almost pleading. Dean rolled down the window just enough to hear the puppy better. What are you doing out here?" His voice cracked, raw from hours of silence and the sting of regret. For a moment, Dean considered just going around, leaving the animal to its fate. After all, wild things died every night in the mountains. Nature was brutal and unforgiving. But something in the puppy's eyes, a raw, desperate need, tore through Dean's walls. Maybe deep down, he recognized the look. Maybe he'd worn it himself, back when he still believed someone might stop for him. Scout darted closer, almost under the bumper now, barking louder, then turning, running a few yards toward the trees before spinning back, yelping. The message was clear: "Follow me." Dean hesitated, icy wind slapping his face, his instincts battling logic. Why would I trust a stray in the middle of nowhere? Why now? But that old, battered part of himself, the part that had once run into burning buildings, the part that believed in second chances, started to flicker. He stepped out of the truck, boots crunching through the snow, breath steaming in the dark. The cold hit him like a wall, numbing his face, freezing the tears he didn't want anyone to see. Scout bounced anxiously on his paws, circling Dean's legs, then bolted toward the tree line, glancing back every few feet to make sure the human was following. Every instinct told Dean this was reckless. The woods were dangerous. Bears, wolves, and something worse. Memories. But the sense of urgency was overwhelming. The puppy wasn't lost. He was on a mission, and Dean, despite himself, couldn't turn away. He plunged into the forest after Scout, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the swirling snow. The silence was deeper here, broken only by the sound of Scout's rapid panting and the crunch of Dean's boots. Each step was a fight. The drifts came up to his knees, branches whipped his face, and the bitter cold clawed at every inch of exposed skin. But Scout wouldn't let him stop. When Dean lagged behind, the puppy yelped, running back to nip at his boots before charging ahead, barking encouragement. It was as if every second mattered, as if something precious was slipping away in the storm. Suddenly, the wind shifted, and Dean caught a new sound. A thin, agonized whimper, so raw it sent a jolt of adrenaline through his veins. Scout broke into a sprint, nearly disappearing in the gloom, his barking now even more frantic. Dean stumbled into a small clearing, flashlight beam sweeping over a nightmarish scene. Blood splattered across the snow, deep red against blinding white. There, tangled in a cruel steel trap, was the source of the cries, a full-grown German shepherd, her coat matted, one leg mangled and bleeding, eyes glazed with agony and fear. Scout launched himself at the wounded dog, his mother, licking her face, whining, pawing desperately at the trap. Dean's heart pounded. Memories of every failure, every loss he couldn't prevent, surged up, threatening to drown him. But the old training kicked in. His hands shook as he dug out his emergency kit, working clumsily with numb fingers. Blood soaked through his gloves as he worked the trap's frozen jaws, every second stretching into eternity. All around them, the forest pressed close, silent but alive with unseen dangers. Dean's breath rasped in his ears, mingling with Luna's agonized whimpers and Scout's yelps. He heard a distant howl, a long, mournful sound that raised the hair on his neck. Wolves. Closer than he'd like, he forced the trap open, gritting his teeth, feeling the muscles in his hands strain. Finally, with a wrench, the jaws sprang apart, and Luna collapsed into the snow, shivering and whimpering, but free. Dean wrapped her leg, adrenaline burning away the pain in his own fingers. He glanced back, seeing only the swirl of snow and darkness, but the sense of being watched was undeniable. Scout stood his ground beside his mother, facing the trees, ears up, body taut, a tiny guardian. The wind howled, the forest creaked. Dean, his protective instincts fully awake, scooped Luna up in his arms. "Let's get you out of here." But even as he turned, the question burned in his mind. Why was this puppy out here alone? What had happened in these woods? Could he trust himself to get them all to safety, this time? Scout led the way, glancing back to make sure Dean was keeping up, his barks echoing into the endless Montana night. And as the darkness closed in, Dean felt something he hadn't in a long, long time. A flicker of hope. Maybe this lost puppy had come to save him too. Dean's boots broke through the icy crust as he trudged deeper into the trees, Luna's weight heavy in his arms. Scout darting beside him like a living shadow. The wind ripped at his coat, needles of snow stinging his cheeks, but he barely noticed. His mind was on the dog in his arms, the way her breath hitched, the dark red stain spreading through the bandage on her leg, the glazed look in her eyes. "Keep moving," he ordered himself, teeth gritted. "Don't let her die here, not tonight." Scout ran ahead, then circled back, his yelps high and desperate. Each time Dean's steps faltered, the puppy barked, refusing to let him rest. There was no path, only the skeletal shapes of pines and the crunch of crusted snow underfoot. Dean's heart hammered. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made him tense up. Somewhere behind, out in the night, wolves howled, their voices rising and falling, a primal chorus that made Dean's blood run cold. His flashlight beam jerked with each step, illuminating the trail of blood they left behind. He tried not to think about what might be tracking that scent. As he pushed forward, the terrain got rougher. Fallen branches, hidden rocks. He stumbled more than once, nearly going down. But every time, Scout's insistent presence urged him on. The puppy pressed close to Luna's head, licking her face, whining, a raw, wordless plea. "Don't give up." Suddenly, Dean's foot caught on something buried beneath the snow. He went down hard, Luna slipping from his arms, a sharp jolt of pain shooting up his wrist. He cursed, rolling to his knees, brushing snow from his eyes. The flashlight landed in a drift, its beam illuminating a chilling sight. A set of fresh boot prints, half filled with snow, leading toward the place where Luna had been caught. Dean's breath caught. Someone had been here. Recently, his mind raced. Memories of poachers, hunters who set illegal traps. Men who'd rather kill than get caught. The thought sent a shudder down his spine. Was the person still nearby, watching them struggle through the trees? He scooped Luna back up, scanning the darkness. For a moment, he considered heading back to his truck, but the path was gone, lost in the whiteout. The only option was to keep moving, deeper into the forest, trusting Scout's frantic instincts. The trees grew denser. The air thickened with the metallic scent of blood and fear. Luna whimpered, her body trembling. Scout pushed close, trying to nuzzle her, but kept darting nervous glances at the shadows. Dean worked through the fog of his own panic, forcing himself to breathe slow, steady breaths. He focused on the little things, the sound of Luna's ragged breathing, the warmth of Scout's fur brushing his ankle, the crackle of ice underfoot. Then, without warning, a chorus of howls split the night, so close now that Dean froze. Eyes gleamed from the shadows, half a dozen, maybe more, reflecting the flashlight's beam with a cold, feral light. Wolves. They moved between the trees like ghosts, slipping in and out of sight. Their bodies low, tails down, eyes fixed on Dean and the dogs. Panic surged. He'd faced down armed men, chased fugitives through city streets. But this was something elemental, something no badge could protect him from. He crouched, trying to make himself bigger, shifting Luna to his side, reaching for the old multi-tool in his pocket. It was laughable. Barely a knife, certainly not a weapon against wolves. But he had nothing else. Scout stepped forward, placing his tiny body between the pack and his mother. His fur bristled, lips curled, and he barked, a sharp, defiant sound. The wolves paused, uncertain, reading the standoff. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Dean's breath steamed in the air, every muscle locked. He remembered something an old ranger had once told him. Don't run, don't show fear. Make yourself look dangerous. Protect your pack. He bared his teeth, yelling, swinging the flashlight, making noise. Back off! Get away! His voice sounded thin, lost in the wind, but the wolves hesitated, ears flicking back. Scout kept barking, the sound growing hoarse. Luna tried to lift her head, eyes glazed, but she managed a single weak growl. The lad wolf, a huge gray with scars across his muzzle, stepped closer, testing. Scout didn't budge. He barked again, digging his paws into the snow. Dean felt a surge of pride and fear. He's just a puppy. Why won't he back down? Maybe because he knew, somehow, that it was his job. Dean grabbed a broken branch and swung it through the air, whacking it against a tree. The sudden noise startled the wolves. They flinched, pulling back a step. Dean pressed the advantage, shouting, stomping, making himself as big and loud as possible. For several endless seconds, it was a test of will. Man and puppy against the wild. Finally, the wolves turned, melting back into the trees, their eyes never leaving the trio. Scout kept barking until they vanished. Then he collapsed in the snow, chest heaving, but he crawled back to Luna's side, nuzzling her face. Dean sagged, adrenaline draining from his body. He dropped to his knees beside the dogs, wrapping his arms around them both. For a long moment, he just breathed, feeling their warmth, the pounding of his own heart. He was shaking, not just from the cold, but from the memory of another night. Another time he'd felt helpless. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the urge to break. Scout whined, licking Dean's hand, as if telling him to keep going. Dean nodded. Okay, buddy, we're not done yet. He looked up, scanning the forest. Somewhere out there, the man who set the trap might still be watching. They couldn't stay here. Dean got to his feet, lifting Luna again. Scout pressed close to his side. He started moving, step by step, deeper into the snowy darkness, determined to find safety or die trying. As the storm raged around them, a strange sense of purpose burned in Dean's chest. He wasn't just trying to save these dogs. He was fighting to save himself, to prove, maybe for the first time in years, that he wasn't finished, that hope could still survive even the darkest night. Dean's legs ached as he trudged through the endless maze of snow-laden trees, his breath burning in his lungs, Luna's limp form cradled against his chest. Scout kept pace, never leaving his mother's side, each step more determined than the last. By now, the world beyond the forest had vanished. There was only snow, wind, darkness, and the sounds of their 3 beating hearts. The night grew colder, crueler, and every gust of wind seemed to howl with the threat of unseen predators. Dean's flashlight flickered, threatening to die. The storm thickened, the trees bending and groaning beneath the weight of snow. His body screamed for rest, but the need to protect these dogs, no, his dogs now, overruled every ache. He had to find shelter. He had to keep them alive. A sudden memory hit him. A younger Dean, badge shining, racing into a burning house after a lost child, never doubting himself, never thinking of failure. Now those days felt like someone else's life. His hands shook, not just from cold, but from the memory of that single shot. That moment everything went wrong. The night his partner bled out, and he couldn't save him. The guilt had never left. Tonight, that old raw pain crashed against his new reality. Another life depended on him, another chance to make things right. After what felt like miles, Dean stumbled into a small clearing where the wind eased slightly. He scanned for anything, a cave, a rock outcrop, some sign the land would shelter them. Nothing but fallen branches and deep snow. He dropped to his knees, chest heaving. "Okay, think, Dean," he muttered. "You know how to survive. You can do this." Scout, shivering violently, whined and pressed his nose into Luna's fur. The mother dog whimpered softly, licking her puppy's face, offering comfort even as she trembled from blood loss and shock. Dean felt something break inside him. Admiration, grief, and an aching responsibility mingled in his chest. With shaking hands, he began building a crude shelter. He broke branches, piling them into a lean-to against the base of a large pine. He shrugged off his heavy coat, draping it over Luna and Scout, to keep the worst of the cold off their bodies. The act left him exposed to the wind, but he didn't care. He needed them to make it through the night. As he worked, the blizzard swirled around them, muffling every sound except the endless moan of the wind and the far-off howls of wolves. The cold pressed in, seeping into bone and soul, but Dean forced himself to keep moving, keep caring. He covered Luna's wounded leg with another layer of cloth torn from his shirt, praying the bleeding would stop. Scout watched, wide-eyed, as if memorizing every move, every touch. Finally, when his fingers went numb and the shelter was as good as it would get, Dean crawled inside, huddling close to the 2 dogs. Luna whimpered, her breath fogging the air, but she reached out, licking Dean's hand in a gesture that broke through every wall he'd built around his heart. Scout curled against her, his tiny body pressed close for warmth and safety. For a long time, Dean listened to the sounds of the storm, letting the white noise drown out his swirling thoughts. The past pressed in, the flash of gunfire, the radio calls for backup, his partner's last words. But here in the dark, it was the present that mattered. Luna's shallow breaths, Scout's gentle whines, the brittle cold. They pulled him back to this moment, this fight for survival. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled, the sound echoing through the trees. Dean tensed, feeling the ancient primal fear rise up inside him. He checked the shelter, making sure no gap was left uncovered. He pulled Luna and Scout closer, feeling their warmth, hearing the soft, trusting sigh that Scout let out. "They're depending on you," he told himself. "Don't let them down." He fumbled for his radio, battered, half frozen, but still his last lifeline. Static filled the air as he pressed the button, his voice barely more than a whisper. "This is Dean Callahan. I need help. Trapped in the forest near Timber Ridge. Injured dog. Repeat, injured dog. Possible poacher activity." The radio sputtered, crackling, but then, for a moment, a voice broke through, distorted and faint. "Dean, heard. Hold on." Hope flared, tiny but stubborn. Dean held the radio close, praying for another fragment, but only silence followed. He was on his own until morning. He glanced at Scout, who was still wide awake, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the shelter. The puppy's whole body trembled, but he refused to sleep, as if he believed that only his vigilance kept the wolves at bay. Dean stroked his head, whispering, "You're a good boy. You saved her. You saved me." Luna shifted, wincing at the pain in her leg. Still, she nudged Scout toward Dean, and for the first time, the puppy curled up against the man's chest, trusting, exhausted. Dean felt a lump in his throat, something he hadn't felt in years, the fragile beginnings of trust, the spark of connection. Outside, the storm raged, battering their shelter, wolves howling into the night. Inside, the three huddled together, drawing warmth and comfort from each other. Dean felt the exhaustion seep into his bones, but he forced himself to stay awake, just in case. He watched the slow, steady rise and fall of Luna's chest, the fierce set of Scout's jaw, and he promised himself he would keep them alive, no matter what it took. The hours crawled by, the darkness absolute. When Dean's eyes finally closed, it was only for seconds at a time. He'd jolt awake at every howl, every snap of a branch, every twitch from the dogs. But as the night wore on, he realized something incredible. For the first time in a long time, he was needed, and that need, raw, urgent, and real, gave him a reason to fight until morning. Dawn felt impossibly far away, but hope, no matter how faint, had found them in the storm. A faint glow crept over the horizon, pushing back the edge of the endless storm. The worst of the blizzard had passed, but the world outside the crude shelter Dean built still looked like something from a dream, everything glazed in ice and painted in cold blue shadows. For a moment, Dean wondered if he'd slept at all. His body ached from the cold, and the weight of exhaustion pressed down on him like an anchor. He'd spent the whole night on high alert, dozing in short, anxious bursts, always waking at the smallest noise. Scout was finally asleep, curled tightly against Luna's belly. The mother dog's breathing was ragged, her injured leg twitching in her sleep. Dean gently checked her bandages. Blood had seeped through, but the bleeding had mostly stopped. He exhaled shakily. Not quite relief, but not despair either. Luna was still alive. Scout was safe, at least for now. That was more than he'd dared hope for hours ago. Somewhere deeper in the woods, a wolf howled. The sound was distant this time, as if the pack had finally decided to move on, leaving them alone for the moment. Dean squinted at the sky, searching for any hint of sunrise through the shroud of clouds and snow. His radio, clutched in his hand all night, was nothing but static. The fragment of a voice he'd caught before haunted him. Had help actually heard him? Or was it just wishful thinking, a trick of a desperate mind? Then, out of nowhere, a new sound broke through the morning hush, the low rumble of an engine. Then a woman's voice, distant but echoing between the trees. "Dean! Dean Callahan! Can you hear me?" The tone was frantic, hoarse from shouting. Dean's pulse kicked up. He fumbled for his flashlight and crawled out of the shelter, the cold biting at his skin. He shouted back, voice cracking, "Here, over here!" The shape of a figure came into view, staggering through the snow, flashlight bobbing, breath billowing in the cold. Officer Maya Lee, her uniform almost lost beneath layers of winter gear, her dark hair plastered to her face with melted snow. She looked like she hadn't slept all night, eyes wild with worry. She saw Dean and broke into a run, stumbling over the uneven ground, half laughing, half sobbing with relief. "Oh my God, Dean!" She almost tackled him in a hug, then caught herself, glancing anxiously at the shelter. "You're okay. Are you hurt? Where are they?" Dean shook his head, emotion thick in his throat. "I'm fine. But the dogs, Luna's in bad shape. Scout's been up all night, wouldn't leave her." His words tumbled out, everything he'd held in since the storm began. Maya knelt in the snow beside the shelter, her hands gentle as she reached for Luna. Scout woke and let out a panicked yelp, immediately placing himself between Maya and his mother, his little body tense and shaking. "It's okay, Scout," Dean whispered, stroking the pup's head. "She's here to help." Maya took in the scene, her face drawn with concern. "We have to get Luna to the rehab center fast. The snow's letting up, but we don't have much time." She looked over her shoulder, signaling for the paramedics she'd brought with her. Moments later, 2 more figures emerged, carrying a stretcher and wrapped in thick jackets. Luna whimpered as they carefully lifted her onto the stretcher, the motion jostling her injured leg. Scout howled, a raw, mournful sound that tore at Dean's heart. He tried to pick the puppy up, but Scout squirmed and snapped, refusing to be separated from his mother. "Easy, boy! Easy!" Dean pleaded. But the puppy's anguish was palpable. The paramedics did their best to reassure both dogs, murmuring soft words and moving quickly. Maya took Scout, holding him close as they hurried back toward the vehicles. Dean followed, legs shaking, not sure if it was from relief or sheer exhaustion. Maya kept her arm around his shoulders, her own hands trembling. "When you didn't check in, Dean, I thought—" She couldn't finish the thought. The look in her eyes said enough. As they reached the clearing where Maya's SUV waited, Dean glanced back at the forest. The snow was covered in tracks, wolf prints, boot prints, drag marks where Luna had been carried. He frowned, a sense of unease prickling the back of his neck. "Wait, those boot prints. Did you see them? Someone set that trap. Someone's been out here recently." Maya nodded grimly. "I know. We found a trail camera by the creek. Whoever did this might still be watching, and the local warden said poachers have been active again." She glanced at Dean, worry etching deep lines in her face. "You're not safe out here alone, Dean. Not with what happened last time." A shiver ran through him, not from the cold, but from the memory of a different hunt, a different night when everything went wrong. He pushed the thought away. "We'll figure it out. Right now, Luna needs help." They loaded Luna into the back of the SUV, Scout climbing in beside her, refusing to let anyone separate them. As the doors closed, Dean caught his own reflection in the window. A man who looked nothing like the lost, broken soul who'd come here to escape the world. There was something new in his eyes, a flicker of hope, the beginnings of trust. Maya started the engine, blasting the heater, and reached over to squeeze Dean's shoulder. "You did good, Dean. You saved them." Dean shook his head, swallowing hard. "They saved me." His voice was hoarse, the admission pulling at old scars. As the SUV bumped down the snowy road, Scout howled again, a sound that echoed through the forest, raw with grief and love and the terror of being left behind. Luna lifted her head, licking her puppy's face, her eyes meeting Dean's in the mirror. Outside, the forest remained still and silent, but Dean knew the threat wasn't gone. Somewhere out there, someone was still watching. And now, he had more than his own life to protect. But for now, as the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting golden light over the snow, Dean allowed himself to hope. Whatever came next, he wasn't alone. Bright fluorescent lights burned in the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, their harsh glare a sharp contrast to the icy, shadowed forest Dean had just left behind. Luna lay on a steel table in the surgery room, her breaths shallow and uneven, her eyes half closed in exhaustion and pain. Scout paced back and forth just outside the glass doors, his nose pressed against the window, leaving foggy marks each time he whined. Dean stood nearby, arms wrapped tight across his chest, heart pounding as if it would leap right out of his ribcage. Maya hovered close, her presence steady but tense, watching both Dean and the frantic puppy. Inside the surgery room, Dr. Evelyn Cho worked with quiet, focused intensity. Her hands moved quickly but gently, assessing Luna's wounded leg and prepping for the delicate work ahead. The vet techs readied bandages, IVs, and clamps, their voices hushed. "Compound fracture, severe lacerations," Dr. Cho muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "We're going to do everything we can." Scout's mournful howls echoed through the clinic. Growing louder every minute, the door stayed closed. Even the staff, hardened to the suffering of wild and domestic animals alike, blinked back tears at the puppy's desperate cries. Maya tried to distract Scout with treats and soft words, but he wanted only his mother. He pawed at the glass, whimpering, occasionally letting out a sharp, angry bark when anyone tried to comfort him. "Easy, little man," Maya whispered, crouching beside him. "She's strong. She's going to make it." Dean could barely stand to watch. He pressed his fist to his mouth, staring through the glass, the bright light reflecting his tired, drawn face. He'd felt powerless before, helpless in the face of violence, loss, and trauma. But tonight, it cut deeper. He wanted nothing more than to take Luna's pain on himself, to reach through the glass and fix what was broken. But all he could do was wait. He glanced over at Maya, who was tapping a file on her tablet. "You get a look at those boot prints?" he asked quietly. "You think it's the same guy from last year?" Maya nodded, lips pursed. "We found more by the creek, along with a trail cam. Caught a blurry shot of someone, tall, heavy build, camo jacket. It matches the description of Caleb North." Her eyes met Dean's, and the unspoken history between them sharpened the air. "He's out. Got out a few weeks ago. Never should have walked, Dean." A chill ran through Dean that had nothing to do with the cold. Caleb North, a poacher known for his cruelty, his traps, and his deep grudge against Dean for the bust that put him away. "You're sure?" Dean's voice was tight. "We've got a partial boot print, a shot of his truck near Timber Ridge. And now this." Maya's hand shook as she swiped through the images. "He's watching, Dean. Maybe he saw you last night. Maybe he wanted you to find that trap." Dean felt the old anger rise up, a burning, useless fury at the injustice of it all. But more than that, he felt fear. Not just for himself, but for Luna, for Scout, for anyone who might cross Caleb's path. The tension in the waiting room was thick, punctuated only by the steady beeping of medical machines and the sound of Scout's claws on the linoleum. After what felt like hours, Dr. Cho finally emerged, peeling off her gloves. "She's stable," she said, her voice a mix of exhaustion and relief. The leg was too badly damaged to save, but she'll live. She's a fighter, that one. She'll need time and a lot of care, but she'll walk. Just not the way she used to. Dean let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Thank you," he whispered. Scout, sensing the change in mood, yipped and barked, tail wagging furiously even as he limped from pawing too hard at the door. The staff let him in, and he bounded straight for Luna's side, nuzzling her face and licking her ear, refusing to leave even as she lay groggy and stitched up. Maya put a hand on Dean's shoulder, grounding him. "We'll keep them safe here tonight, and tomorrow we'll get the investigation moving. You should get some rest." But rest was impossible. Dean followed Maya into her small office, where they filed a formal report and pored over the evidence. Boot prints, photos from the trail camera, records of North's release, sightings of his old truck on logging roads. "We're going to get him this time," Maya said, her tone fierce. "He won't hurt anyone else." Dean nodded, but a heavy dread settled in his gut. He'd faced dangerous men before, but North was different. He played by no rules, and the grudge he held was personal. Dean glanced through the glass into the recovery room, watching Luna's slow, steady breaths and Scout's unwavering vigil. He realized how quickly these two had become his family, and how far he would go to protect them. As the night deepened and the clinic grew quiet, Dean sat on the floor beside Scout, letting the puppy curl in his lap. Luna, resting but watchful, fixed her eyes on Dean, and something unspoken passed between them. Trust, gratitude, maybe even a little forgiveness for the pain of the world. Outside, the threat still loomed, but inside those walls, the first seeds of healing were planted. Dean knew this was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. The days that followed felt like a blur. A strange, gentle recovery cocooned in the warmth of Dean's remote log cabin, high in the Montana woods. The first morning home, the sunlight poured in golden through the frosted windows, painting Scout's fur in buttery streaks as he curled protectively beside Luna's broad, bandaged body. The world outside was still dangerous, still haunted by threats seen and unseen. But inside, there was something almost sacred, a fragile peace, a chance to begin again. Dean stoked the fire in the old stone hearth, watching as flames licked upward and warmth seeped into his bones. He moved quietly, careful not to startle Luna as she slept. Her recovery was slow, and she struggled to stand on 3 legs, but every time she fell, she'd give a low, stubborn growl and try again. Her resilience amazed Dean, and it inspired him to keep pushing, even on the darkest days. Scout shadowed her everywhere, never more than a tail's length away, always quick to nuzzle her face or share a silent look that said, "We're still here. We're together." The Wildlife Rehab Center called daily to check in, and Dr. Cho even stopped by once, leaving extra antibiotics and treats. Maya was in and out, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just checking the perimeter. Each visit, she'd give Dean a look, a mixture of relief, worry, and something unspoken. "I put up new cameras by the drive and the back fence," she told him one evening as the sun dipped behind the ridge, "just in case." Dean nodded, grateful for her steady presence, but he felt the old tension gnawing in his stomach. At night, when the woods fell silent and the wind howled against the eaves, his mind would race. He couldn't help but scan the live feeds from the new security cameras, looking for any sign of Caleb North, a shadow in the snow, headlights flashing in the dark, footprints that didn't belong. Still, the cabin became a sanctuary for all of them. Dean found himself slowly lowering his guard. He cooked simple meals, grilled chicken, scrambled eggs, whatever he could coax Scout into eating between nervous glances at Luna. Luna, meanwhile, learned to move with surprising speed and grace on her 3 legs, chasing Scout in slow, loping circles around the kitchen. There were hard moments, of course. Nights when Luna whimpered in pain, when Scout barked at his own reflection, when Dean's hands shook as he tried to fill out his reinstatement application for the sheriff's department. The form sat on the kitchen table for days, a symbol of the life he'd left behind, and the one he wasn't sure he could reclaim. Each question made him pause. Have you experienced trauma on the job? Do you feel ready to return to duty? His answers were honest, sometimes too honest, he worried. He still had nightmares. He still saw his partner's blood on the ground, heard the echo of gunshots, the final broken radio call. But every morning, when Scout nudged him awake and Luna nuzzled his hand, Dean felt the world shift just a little, the burden a bit lighter. One afternoon, as the wind rattled the windows and snow drifted against the door, Maya stopped by with bad news. She stood in the mudroom, shoulders tense, voice low. Dean, the sheriff's office picked up movement on the trail cams last night. It's north. He was less than a mile from your cabin, walking the tree line. He's out there. And he's not alone. There's another set of prints, probably one of his old crew. A chill ran through Dean, cold and sharp as a knife. Is the department doing a sweep? They're trying, Maya said, glancing out the window. But the snow's making it impossible to track him in real time. We don't have enough manpower. And he knows these woods. Dean, you need to take this seriously. North isn't just after game. He blames you, and now, her eyes flicked to Luna and Scout. Then back to Dean. He knows how to hurt you. Dean nodded grimly, pressing a hand to the back of his neck. I won't let anything happen to them. The old protective rage rose up in him, burning away the fog of exhaustion. He started checking his own security setup, repositioning cameras, testing locks, charging his backup phone. For the first time since losing his badge, Dean pulled out his old service pistol, checking the action, making sure it was clean and loaded. He didn't want to use it, but he would if he had to. That night, the tension in the cabin was palpable. Luna, sensing the shift, stayed close to Dean's side, her head on his knee as he worked. Scout was restless, pacing from room to room, barking at every noise. Outside, the woods seemed to lean closer, shadows pressing against the glass. Dean watched the monitors, breath held tight in his chest, every sense alert. Maya called once more before midnight. Promise me you'll call if you see anything, she said, voice cracking. Promise me, Dean. He promised. He sat awake for hours, listening to the wind, the pop and hiss of the fire, Luna's soft breaths. Scout finally settled at the foot of Dean's bed, eyes wide and watchful, as if daring the darkness to come closer. But even as fear gnawed at the edges of Dean's heart, something else began to grow. It was the sense of family, of belonging, of being part of something worth fighting for again. Luna's determination, Scout's unbreakable loyalty, Maya's quiet courage. They were no longer just survivors. Together, they were becoming something stronger. In the morning, Dean looked out at the snow, at the tracks of animals and men, and felt the old courage stirring. No matter what Caleb North brought to their door, he would be ready. This time, he would not let his family down. By the next night, the quiet sense of sanctuary that Dean, Luna, and Scout had found in the cabin had all but vanished. In its place was a nervous energy, every window checked, every sound outside met with a held breath. Maya was back, this time with her own duffel bag and duty pistol, refusing to let Dean spend another night alone. The sense of threat was no longer just a shadow in Dean's mind. It was real. Caleb North was out there, and he wanted revenge. They set up a routine, each person taking shifts to monitor the feeds from the security cameras Maya had helped install. On the screens, the snowy woods glowed ghostly in the infrared, branches swaying in the wind, tiny animals darting across the pale-lit snow. But there was always the possibility that something else, a man, a threat, could appear at any moment. Luna limped around the house, always alert, refusing to rest when Dean and Maya were tense. Her injury didn't stop her from putting herself between Scout and the door whenever a branch scraped against the siding. Scout seemed to sense the rising fear, sticking close to Dean's feet, his young muscles taut, tail bristling at every unfamiliar noise. Late into the night, Maya sat at the kitchen table with Dean, maps spread out, her notepad covered in scribbled reminders. She looked exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes, hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. "He's not afraid of us," she said quietly. "Leaving that trap, coming this close. North wants you to know he's here. He wants to see you scared, Dean." Dean glanced at the window, snow swirling outside the glow of the porch light. "I haven't slept right since we found Luna," he admitted, voice low. "I keep going over the old case files, wondering if I missed something, if I did enough. North's always been reckless, but this is personal." Maya hesitated, then set down her coffee, meeting Dean's eyes. "You know, after you left the force, I struggled. I kept asking myself if I could really handle it alone. But every time I doubted myself, I thought about how you never gave up. Even after what happened. I need you to remember you're not alone in this. Not anymore." For a moment, the tension softened. Dean reached across the table, his hand briefly covering Maya's. "Thank you, Maya. I mean it." Their moment was interrupted by Scout's growling, a deep, warning sound from the front hallway. Dean and Maya exchanged a look and moved quickly, Luna right behind. Scout stood at the door, hackles raised, barking fiercely. Dean checked the monitors, his stomach dropped. There, in the grainy darkness at the tree line, a tall figure in a camo jacket stood just out of reach of the floodlight. North. He was holding something in his hand, a sheet of paper, flapping in the wind. Dean's phone vibrated with an alert. A camera had detected motion by the back fence as well. 2 locations. Dean's heart hammered. "He's taunting us," he muttered. Maya pulled her pistol from its holster, her face tense but steady. "Stay here with the dogs. I'll check the back. Lock the doors behind me." "Wait," Dean said, grabbing his own weapon and following her. "We do this together. I'm not letting you go out there alone." Luna and Scout crowded the door, unwilling to let their family split apart. But Dean knelt and whispered, "Stay. Guard." He and Maya crept through the snow, flashlights off, keeping low. Every sense was heightened. The creak of the fence, the crunch of ice under boots, the adrenaline surging through Dean's veins. They rounded the corner and saw it, a note pinned to a tree with a hunting knife. Dean's hands shook as he pulled it free. In blocky handwriting it read, "You took everything from me, time to pay." Maya's jaw clenched. "He's escalating. He's not just after you. He wants to hurt everyone you care about." A movement in the woods caught their eye. Dean raised his gun, flashlight beam catching only empty branches, but the message was clear. North could be anywhere, watching. Back inside the cabin, the air was charged with fear and anger. Dean bolted the doors, checked every window, and took inventory of the supplies. They brought Luna and Scout into the living room, barricading the hallway. Maya paced, restless. "We need more backup," she said. "I'll call for another patrol car, maybe even state police." As they waited, Dean finally let some of the old feelings surface. The guilt, the dread, but also the fierce desire to protect what mattered. Luna limped over and rested her head on his knee. Scout pressed close against his chest. Maya sank down beside them, her armor cracking as she admitted, "I'm scared too, Dean. Not just for you, for all of us." Dean wrapped an arm around her. "We'll get through this. We have to." Hours passed. No backup came. The roads were snowed in, the radio a constant drone of weather warnings and static. It was just them, Dean, Maya, Luna, and Scout, against the dark. The cabin, once a haven, was now a fortress. Dean didn't sleep. He watched the windows, gun close, heart pounding. Outside, the woods pressed in, filled with the threat of North and the weight of everything Dean had lost and was determined not to lose again. But for all the fear, there was something else. Resolve. Dean felt it in Maya's touch, Luna's loyalty, and Scout's unwavering courage. They would stand together, no matter what the night brought. The wind howled around the cabin, rattling the old window panes and sending sharp bursts of icy air through the smallest cracks in the walls. Night pressed in on Timber Ridge like a weight, heavier than ever. Dean sat rigid in front of the security monitors, eyes red and gritty, his service pistol resting at his elbow. Maya kept her phone close, repeatedly checking for a signal. Luna dozed fitfully by the fireplace, her head on Scout's back. But even in sleep, her ears twitched at every distant sound. The sense of siege was palpable. All day the tension had grown. North's threatening note still sat on the table, a reminder that the man who'd haunted Dean's nightmares was out there, somewhere in the dark, close enough to taunt, bold enough to leave his mark. Suddenly, the monitor in the corner flickered. A ghostly figure appeared on the edge of the property. Tall, heavy build, camo jacket blending with the trees. North. Adrenaline surged through Dean. He tapped Maya on the shoulder, and she was instantly alert, reaching for her weapon. Luna and Scout woke, both of them lifting their heads, hackles rising, low growls rumbling in their chests. "He's here," Dean whispered, voice tight. "And he's not alone. Look." The camera panned, and a second figure, smaller but equally menacing, crept alongside North, the beam of a flashlight slicing through the woods. Two men armed, moving with the confidence of hunters. Dean's heart pounded as he shut off the inside lights, plunging the cabin into shadow. "We're going to have to move," he said, voice calm but urgent. "If we just sit here, they'll have us pinned." He checked the gun, double-checked the safety, tried to quiet his breathing. Maya nodded, her own face set in grim lines. "I'll cover the back. You take the front with Scout and Luna. If they split up, we can't let them flank us." As they moved into position, Dean knelt beside Scout. The puppy stared up at him, fierce and focused. "You remember the trail, boy? The scent?" Scout wagged his tail once, a silent signal. Dean's throat tightened. He knew this little dog would follow him anywhere, even into danger. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, sharp, cracking through the forest like a whip. Glass shattered in the mudroom as a bullet tore through a window. Maya ducked low, scanning the trees. "They're trying to flush us out." Dean's instincts took over. "Scout, with me!" He grabbed Luna's collar, and together they slipped out the back door into the snow. Maya followed, her footsteps light but determined, eyes flicking constantly between the shadows and the ground. The woods swallowed them instantly. Snow crunched underfoot, breath steaming in the cold. Dean scanned the tree line, heart hammering in his chest. Scout led the way, nose to the ground, body tense. Luna limped after him, refusing to be left behind despite the pain in her injured leg. For a moment, everything was still. Then movement, a flash of a camo jacket, a beam of light sweeping dangerously close. North was moving fast, determined, reckless. Dean motioned for Maya to circle wide, hoping to draw the men away from the dogs. Scout darted ahead, barking, his voice sharp in the silence. Luna pushed forward, every muscle trembling with effort. Dean tried to keep his focus, tracking footprints, listening for the crunch of boots behind him. Another shot rang out, this one closer, sending birds flapping from the trees. And then it happened. North crashed through a thicket, face twisted with rage, gun raised. "This ends tonight," he bellowed. Maya's voice cut through the dark. "Drop it, North, you're surrounded. Give it up." But North was beyond reason. He fired again, the shot missing by inches. Luna lunged, her body moving on instinct, throwing herself between North and Scout. She knocked the man's arm aside, teeth flashing, as Scout barked furiously and lunged at North's leg, clamping down with surprising strength. Dean rushed in, adrenaline flooding his system. He tackled North, wrestling him to the ground as Maya darted forward, gun drawn, voice steady. "Don't move! Drop it now!" North thrashed wildly, but Dean pressed his knee into the man's back, wrenching the weapon away. Scout released his grip, barking triumphantly. Luna, wounded but defiant, stood protectively over Scout, her body shaking but her gaze never wavering. North's accomplice, spooked by the chaos, bolted into the woods, flashlight bouncing wildly. Maya kept her weapon trained on North, who finally went limp, cursing under his breath. "You're done," she said coldly. "It's over." Sirens, distant but growing louder, pierced the night air. Backup had finally arrived, headlights slicing through the trees. Relief washed through Dean, mingling with the exhaustion and the sting of old wounds. He glanced down at Luna, who pressed her nose into his palm, her eyes full of pride and pain. Scout curled at her side, chest heaving, tail wagging furiously. The police cuffed North, dragging him away. Maya gave Dean a tired but triumphant smile. "You did it. We did it." Dean looked at his little family, Luna limping but undefeated, Scout licking her wounds, Maya standing tall at his side, and felt a deep, overwhelming gratitude. The night was finally still. The threat was gone. Dean gathered Luna and Scout into his arms, pressing his forehead to theirs. "You saved us," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "All of you." For the first time in a long, long while, Dean allowed himself to hope, not just for survival, but for a future. The past had lost its hold. The family he never expected was now the family he couldn't imagine living without. And as the first hints of dawn painted the sky, Timber Ridge was quiet again. Safe for now, because they had stood together. 1 year later, Timber Ridge had shed its shroud of snow and shadow. The morning sun glinted off new grass, dappling the town park in gold and green. And everywhere there was life. Children chasing each other, neighbors sharing coffee on benches, dogs wagging their tails at every passerby. Where there had once been whispers about tragedy and old ghosts, now there was laughter. And at the heart of it all, right by the bandstand, stood a statue that seemed to glow in the morning light. It was Scout, immortalized in bronze, one paw lifted, ears alert and proud, his little body angled as if he were about to leap forward. At his side, a smaller figure, Luna, captured with dignity and gentle strength, her three-legged stance carved as a badge of honor rather than a mark of loss. The plaque read, "For courage, for loyalty, for the family we choose." A crowd had gathered for the ceremony, their faces a mosaic of joy, gratitude, and pride. Maya stood at the edge of the stage, her uniform crisp, her expression a mixture of professional pride and personal happiness. Dean watched her, a warm smile on his face, then knelt to adjust the red bandana around Scout's neck. The shepherd, now nearly grown, wagged his tail and licked Dean's chin, his bright eyes scanning the sea of friendly faces. Luna lay quietly beside him, basking in the attention. Her gait was different now, slower, more deliberate, but she carried herself with unmistakable confidence. Children crouched near her, gently running their hands over her fur, awed by her calmness and her story. Dean rose to the podium, the microphone trembling slightly in his hand. He took a long breath, his eyes shining as he looked out over the people who'd once regarded him with suspicion, pity, or distance. Now they saw him differently. They saw the family he had fought to protect. "Thank you, everyone, for being here today," Dean began, his voice rough but steady. "When I first came to Timber Ridge, I didn't know if I'd ever find a place to belong again. I was running from my own mistakes, from the things I'd lost. And if I'm honest, from myself. But I met Luna and Scout on the coldest, darkest night of my life. They needed me, and I realized I needed them too." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. The memory of that storm, of Luna's blood on the snow, of Scout's fierce loyalty, of the fear and hope that warred inside him, flashed through his mind. These two dogs saved me in more ways than I can say. Scout, for his courage when he was just a puppy, risking everything for his mother. Luna, for her strength, her resilience, her refusal to give up, even when the odds were stacked against her. Dean glanced at Maya, who smiled and nodded, her eyes misty. But it wasn't just them. It was all of you. This community stepped up when we needed backup, when we needed a safe place to heal, when we needed justice. And it's because of that spirit, that willingness to stand together, that we're all here today. Timber Ridge is home now, not because of any one person or animal, but because of the way we came together in the face of fear. The crowd was quiet, listening closely. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others smiled at Scout, who sat perfectly still, as if understanding the importance of the moment. "After everything that happened, I found a new calling," Dean continued, voice strengthening with every word. "I was honored to join the department again, this time as a K-9 officer, with Scout at my side. Luna, retired but never forgotten, is our heart. She visits schools, comforts kids, and reminds us all that no wound has to define you." A ripple of applause moved through the crowd. Dean's gaze swept over the faces, the mayor, the sheriff, parents holding their children, the Wildlife Center's staff, Dr. Cho, and even some of the deputies who'd come to their aid that night. He leaned into the mic, his words soft but fierce. "Scout and Luna taught me something I'll never forget. That real courage is staying loyal, even when you're scared. That healing doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means choosing to keep loving, keep fighting, no matter how many times you fall. Today, we celebrate that lesson, and the heroes who remind us to believe in second chances." He stepped back, and Maya joined him, her arm slipping easily around his shoulders. "Dean, you once told me you thought you'd never make a difference again," she said, voice steady but emotional. "But look around. This is what you built, what you all built, together." Dean looked down at Scout and Luna, then out at the crowd. The sun shone brighter, casting long shadows from the statue onto the grass. The ceremony wound down with laughter, the band playing a joyful tune, children climbing on the base of the statue, their parents taking photos. Later, Dean stood with Luna and Scout beneath the old oak trees, Maya by his side. The three of them watched as the town's kids played fetch with Scout, the puppy chasing balls and returning triumphantly, tail a blur of happiness. Luna, regal as ever, let small children drape her in flowers, her patience endless. Dean felt an unfamiliar peace settle over him, a sense of true belonging. The town that had once felt cold and distant now felt warm and alive, woven together by the story they'd survived. Timber Ridge had changed. He had changed. As the day faded to dusk and the park slowly emptied, Dean knelt between his dogs, his hand on each warm, trusting head. "You brought me home," he whispered. "Both of you." And as the statue gleamed in the setting sun, Dean understood at last. Healing isn't a straight road, and family is built on trust, not blood. What mattered was the love they shared, and the courage to begin again. Late summer settled over Timber Ridge with the kind of quiet warmth that only comes after a long, hard winter. The days were long and golden, the nights alive with the gentle chorus of crickets and the scent of pine drifting through open windows. The town had changed in ways both big and small. There was a little more laughter in the streets, a little more kindness in the voices of strangers, and more than one child could be seen tossing a ball to their dog beneath the wide, open sky. And at the heart of it all walked Dean, Maya, Luna, and Scout, no longer just survivors, but a family. The statue of Scout and Luna in the park had quickly become a symbol, not just of courage, but of healing. Children gathered around it, tracing the bronze curves of Luna's missing leg, listening to their parents tell the story of a night when darkness was driven away by loyalty and love. Local teachers used the story in their classrooms, and families who'd once stayed behind closed doors now stopped Dean and Maya on the street to say thank you. One afternoon, as the sunlight dappled the main road and Scout trotted ahead, tail wagging, Dean found himself surrounded by a group of neighborhood kids. "Can Scout really sniff out trouble?" a little boy asked, eyes wide. Dean grinned, kneeling down so he was eye to eye. "Scout's the best partner I've ever had," he said, ruffling the dog's ears. "He's brave, loyal, and always keeps his nose to the ground. Isn't that right, buddy?" Scout barked, chest out, making the children laugh. Luna, graceful and steady, let the smallest girl lay her head against her flank, content in the sun. Dean watched as the little girl traced the old scars and smiled, unafraid. "She's strong," the girl whispered, and Dean nodded, his heart full. The changes in the town weren't just on the surface. The Wildlife Center's funding doubled after Luna and Scout's story reached the local news. Poaching numbers dropped, thanks in part to Dean and Maya's persistent work and the vigilance of neighbors who once would have looked the other way. There was a new sense of pride, of people looking out for each other, of kindness blooming in unexpected places. Dean returned to work with the sheriff's department, this time as a K-9 officer. Every day, he and Scout walked the same mountain trails where fear had once stalked them. Every time Scout sniffed out a clue, or Luna comforted a frightened child, Dean felt something settle and grow inside him, a peace that had once seemed impossible. Maya, too, had changed. The guarded woman who once worked alone had opened up, letting the town see not just her strength, but her compassion. She and Dean shared long walks after dinner, Scout and Luna always trotting ahead, their laughter echoing down empty roads. Sometimes on cool evenings, they would sit outside the cabin, a mug of coffee between them, talking about the future. There were plans for a bigger home, maybe a family of their own someday. For now, this was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped behind Timber Ridge and the shadows grew long, Dean paused at the park, watching a group of teenagers gather around the statue. He listened as they talked, about courage, about what it meant to fight for what's right, about how anyone, no matter how broken, could make a difference. It struck him that the story wasn't really his anymore. It belonged to the whole town, a lesson passed down like a torch. He looked at Luna, whose eyes were wise and patient, and at Scout, whose energy never seemed to fade. He thought about the first night, the terror, the desperation, the moment he chose to follow a barking puppy into the woods. What if he hadn't? Where would he be? Where would any of them be? Later, as the four of them walked home through streets golden with the last light of day, Dean found himself thinking about all they had lost and all they had gained. Maya squeezed his hand. Luna nudged his leg, and Scout trotted between them, occasionally glancing back to make sure everyone was together. They walked past houses where porch lights glowed, where families gathered for dinner, where dogs barked in greeting. The town felt new, as if kindness itself had seeped into its very bones. At home, Dean settled into his favorite chair, Luna at his feet, and Scout curled beside him. Maya prepared tea in the kitchen, humming softly. The air was filled with comfort and belonging. Dean looked around and realized, for the first time in years, he felt whole. He thought about everything they'd survived, the blizzard, the fear, the wolves, and the cruelty of men like Caleb North. He thought about the pain of his old life, the grief that had nearly consumed him, and how, in saving Luna and Scout, he had begun to save himself. Scout lifted his head and nuzzled Dean's hand. Then Luna did the same. Dean smiled, tears stinging his eyes, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. "We made it, didn't we?" he murmured. "We really did." The four of them sat together, a family forged in the crucible of hardship, stronger for every wound and scar. Outside, the statue of Scout and Luna stood silent under the stars, a promise that hope could survive the darkest night, and that loyalty and love could heal what was broken. Dean knew that life would never be perfect. There would always be storms, always be shadows, but now he believed in second chances. He believed in the courage born from compassion, in the power of forgiveness, in the quiet strength of simply refusing to give up. He turned to Maya, Scout, and Luna and whispered, "Thank you." There was nothing more to say. Everything that mattered was right there, beside him. If you believe in second chances, in courage found in the darkest moments, and in the healing power of animals, like and follow our channel. Thank you for listening.